So thank you all for joining this webinar on integrating gender equality in land use finance, managing risks and impacts. This is a webinar that's part of a series of webinars we've been organizing with we, UNEP-WCMC, Port Conservation Monitoring Center, have been organizing together with UNEP in the past few years, really, and more will come later this year. We have a great lineup of speakers today to discuss this topic. We will be focusing on the importance of considering gender in relation to the development of environmental and social impact measurement in land use finance and the integration of the gender elements in this context. Here you see the agenda. So we'll have 3 speakers. Catherine Despot Belmonte, Senior Program Officer with UNEP-WCMC, who leads our work on gender and human rights within the center. Also Mo Westmont, a gender specialist with the European Investment Bank. And finally, Karen Westhouten, Impact and ESG lead from the Demeter Initiative. We'll have time for a question and answer session later on. So please type your questions in the chat or wait to have the opportunity to place your questions during the question and answer session. Moving on, so we will start with a brief introduction by Gaurav Gupta, the Environment and Social Impact Coordinator at the UNEP Land Use Finance Program, who will contextualize this agenda and how this links to the broader agenda of land use finance that UNEP has been working on.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Rodrigo. Very excited to have so many people joining the webinar. So this webinar is a part of a series of webinars that we organize, and this sits within the land use finance program, and the objective of the program is to really increase the finance that's going towards sustainable land use. As a part of this program, we have helped establish a number of innovative financing vehicles such as Agri3, restoration seed capital facilities, some initiatives like IFAC, Good Food Finance Network, etc. And as a part of this program, we also create tools, guidance to help financial institutions manage their risks, assess their risks, manage their risks, as well as to basically measure the impact that their investments create on the ground. And gender has been really an important part of this work. And gender mainstreaming it's really critical, and not just from ethical perspective, but based on my own experience. And by now there have been a lot of studies that very clearly indicate that the areas, the land that is inclusively managed, inclusively governed, where there is greater participation from women in decision making, have positive biodiversity, positive climate impact, positive livelihoods impact. But at the same time, integrating gender is one of the main challenges that the financial institution face, including the impact funds, because it's not easy. First, we have to understand the local context. We have to do a lot of studies, and then we need to design the solutions that are appropriate for the local context. And all of that means that there is a cost involved, which for some financial institutions, for example, the mainstream banks, it's complicated. So we wanted to organize this webinar to have this discussion, also to hear from the practitioners, how do they balance that, their fiduciary responsibilities, as well as to make sure that the gender is appropriately integrated in the land use investments. So this is a part of a series, and we have created this land use impact hub, which Rodrigo will talk more about in future. And the idea is that the learning from these webinars, including this webinar, is integrated in the product and services that we develop and we provide in future to other funds and facilities. So with that, I'll stop there and hand over back to Rodrigo, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you, Gaurav. So we will kickstart the presentations with Catherine Despot Belmonte, who is a colleague of mine at UN Environment Program Board Conservation Monitoring Center, who leads our work on gender and human rights. She'll be bringing some important concepts related to this discussion and provide the background for the next presentations that will be coming. And yeah, thank you, Catherine, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Yes, so I really like this illustration. It's from a publication from the World Bank, work that was carried out in Costa Rica. And I think it does a really good job at illustrating that the roles that men and women play in the rural environment, and when we talk about land use, is different. So measures that have the aim to have long-term positive environmental outcomes need to be gender responsive. That means they need to respond to the needs of women and men. For the purposes of this presentation and this webinar, we're referring to two specific genders, women and men. Because especially when we talk about in the rural environment and indigenous communities, the roles and the knowledge is different and complementary. So both perspectives are key for finding sustainable solutions for environment that lead towards environmental outcomes. And financing is key. So in this publication from Costa Rica, is specifically about land use, and it demonstrates that integrating gender considerations leads to long-term environmental outcomes. Next slide, please. In terms of gender equality and the gender and environment dimension, this has been acknowledged in a number of international conventions and intergovernmental processes. This includes the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the Rio Conventions, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention to Combat Desertification, and the Climate Change Convention. And the UN member states and parties to these conventions have made specific commitments to progress gender equality. And some of these commitments relate to land tenure and women's economic empowerment. Next slide, please. But as you can see from figures that are available, because this is another issue, women's roles tend to be invisible, and the data in terms of gender and the environment dimension is limited. But with data that is available from the process of the Sustainable Development Goals, data that is being gathered to monitor progress towards specific targets, shows that over a third of women employed globally are working in agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, but less than 14% of them are landholders. And as we know, this is important because usually land titles are used as a requirement to access financing and credit. And obviously this is detrimental for women. The other issue, as it has already been mentioned by my colleagues, is the lack of representation of women in the decision-making table. We have some global figures here, but the issue replicates on the local, regional, and global scales. So, for example, only a quarter of seats in national parliaments are held by women. The percentage is slightly higher at the local government. Women tend to be underrepresented in task forces, and here we have the example of COVID-19 task force. Also, there's an underrepresentation of women in managerial positions. And the other issue is that key measures that are useful to address and contribute towards gender equality are also lacking progress. One of them, in terms of addressing women's participation, is having mandatory quotas. So we can see here from a sample of 36 countries, only 33% of them have mandatory quotas to ensure women's participation in governing land tenure systems. The other issue is that to be able to address issues on gender equality, it is important to have financing, and it is important to have gender budgets. But as we can see, based on data from 69 countries, only 19% of them have a system to track gender budgets on their data. Next slide, please. So in order to make women's contributions visible and to showcase that women are, ensure that women are not seen as just a vulnerable group, that is usually how they are perceived in publications, but instead as transformative agents of change. UNEP-WCMC has been collaborating with UN Women and the CBD Secretariat for the past 3 years to ensure that the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is gender responsive, and finding entry points to ensure that implementation is gender responsive. As part of the package of the post-2020 framework, there'll be a gender plan of action that is yet to be agreed, and the whole package is yet to be agreed by parties. But the draft gender plan of action at this stage includes specific actions that relate to land tenure and women's economic development. Next slide, please. In the work that we've carried out, it's become clear that there are 3 key priorities. In this context, we're talking about the Convention on Biological Diversity, but the issues tend to be similar in other conventions and in the environmental sector in general. So a key priority, the first priority, is to ensure equal opportunities for leadership and decision-making at all levels, ensuring equal access, ownership, and control over resources, and to ensure that the benefits from biodiversity conservation and sustainable use are also equally shared. In terms of land use finance, there's evidence that shows that tackling one of these issues has an indirect impact on the 2 others. Next slide, please. This year's theme for the International Women's Day was Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And in this occasion, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity published best practices in gender and biodiversity. And in this publication, they made available a number of case studies and snapshots from all over the world that show that addressing gender equality, addressing gender issues can add up to a number of benefits. These are social, economic, and environmental. Some of the findings also highlight that equitable access to land and natural resources remains important to get all of the multiple benefits, and there are many examples of this. Gender responsive biodiversity finance is key to deliver on gender equality and biodiversity commitments. And the private sector it plays a very important role in terms of livelihoods. So financing mechanisms have significant influence on the degree to which biodiversity actions integrate the gender dimension. And I know that in terms of land tenure is a complex issue, but I think this publication does a really good job at showing some positive progress in alternatives that have formalized women collectives, ensuring their equal participation and user groups, and securing collective titles that enable women to have access to financing. UNEP-WCMC, of course, will contribute towards the process, and we hope that this is a first step to identify ways that we can integrate gender in practical ways in land use financing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I guess this provides a great background for the next presentation. So thank you for highlighting the importance of the topic and the links with the global agenda. We'll move now and hear from Moa Westman, who is a gender specialist with the European Investment Bank. Moa will bring the business case for gender climate smart investments and about the approach the European Investment Bank is adopting in this context. Welcome, Moa.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo, and thanks to UNEP-WCMC for inviting me to be part of this webinar. Really excited to be here along with other speakers. So we are at the European Investment Bank, we are the EU Climate Bank, and we invest in both public and private sector projects, both in the EU as well as beyond, and all our projects are Paris aligned. We are fully committed to increase our financing for climate action and environmental sustainability, including more sustainable land use, as well as our financing that promotes gender equality and women's economic empowerment. And very much in line with the points that Catherine was touching upon, we see these goals as being really closely related. If we move to the next slide. So beyond, I mean, we see it that beyond that, it's simply just the right thing to do. We really believe, and analysis also confirms, that gender smart land use finance strengthens both investment performance and can deliver both significant sustainable land use and conservation outcomes, while also really promoting gender equality and women's economic empowerment. So decades of research has shown how gender diverse firms really performs better on a range of business metrics, including higher returns on assets and equity, better retention rates among staff, but also higher customer satisfaction, as a diverse management and talent pool is a better reflection of customer groups. More recently, we see in the business literature that this type of analysis has also been extended to look at the correlation between gender diversity and environmental performance. Catherine touched on some of these points, but for example, in India, it has been found that forest projects with high participation of women also have been associated with a 28% greater probability of forest generation. We know that women entrepreneurs are much more likely to start sustainability-focused businesses or funds, but that they do lack capital to scale their work. Globally, there is a credit gap of $320 billion for women entrepreneurs, and in many contexts, as we know, the lack of land ownership and property rights for women is really a barrier to access finance and to scale up either domestic or business activities. On the other hand, this credit gap really represents an untapped market as well as an environmental opportunities for investors, whether it's funds, microfinance institutions, or other players in the market. And as Catherine also emphasized, we all know the crucial role that women and local communities play in advancing sustainable natural resource management and land use, but that the gender gaps that are at play is really hampering, the progress that is being made. So how we see it is that if we bring these objectives together, it is both an impact amplifier. We can have socially and environmental goals to mutually reinforce each other and see stronger and more resilient business outcomes being delivered, and just strengthening the firms and the companies that we invest in or that you as fund managers look at. To put it very simply, I mean, it's just frankly smart investing to start looking at both gender and environmental lenses when it comes to both SME but also corporate and public sector lending. If we go to the next slide. This slide is really about trying to clarify what type of investments can, a fund manager or an investor like ourselves look at to start thinking through how can we deliver on both gender and sustainable land use goals. So in our Climate Bank roadmap, which is also publicly available, we have started to think a little bit about this and how we can conceptualize it. So we are looking at investments that would, for example, support women entrepreneurs or women-led funds and fund managers that would be active in the land use or the climate and environment space to really see how we can support them to scale up their businesses or funds. One could look at the investment to see, does it contribute to strengthen the resilience and adaptive capacity of women and girls that are impacted by land and environmental degradation or by broader aspects of climate change. One can also start looking at if these investees are providing employment opportunities, leadership, and new income opportunities for women in the communities, including those that are really affected by land degradation, to kind of set off some of these imbalances. And more broadly, one can also look at does the investment and the land use projects help to also address broader gender inequalities that could be linked to food security, to the time use and time poverty that women might face, that is often very much linked to the stewardship of natural resources and the tasks related to, for example, water collection and energy management. So we find this quite helpful to just think through what type of investments we should kind of look for and target for, and that it can be useful also for fund managers and impact-led investors. One can also flip it around and have the gender first principle come first. So looking at a gender equality or a women's economic empowerment focused investment, if that's where you are coming from in your lens, and then see how sustainable land use measures or environmental outcomes can be promoted in such operations. So a little bit depending on what the starting point is, one could take either sustainable land use or gender equality as the starting point of action. If we go to the next slide. Yeah. So when we work with funds in particular, we use the 2X challenge criteria to explore potential commitments to gender equality. Many of you might be aware of the 2X challenge. It is a global initiative that was launched by the G7 to really mobilize more investments by development finance institutions in support of women's economic empowerment in particular. What has been really important about this initiative is that it sets out a number of criteria that have helped bring some kind of harmonization in the market around what do we mean with gender lens investing and how can we explore gender lens investing with our clients. So many DFIs and also investee companies have really found this as a very helpful framework, and it's there publicly available for everyone to use. So as you can see here on the slide, the criteria are divided into kind of two sections. So there are 4 direct criteria looking at women's entrepreneurship, leadership, and employment, with quantitative thresholds for then what would count as a women-owned or a women-led business. The 4th criteria is around consumption and really looks at if the investee company is generating products or services that close a gender gap. So this could be in relation to land use or, I mean, in any other sector. These criteria can be used across different type of investments. What you have is also then the 5th criteria, which is the indirect one that is specifically designed for financial intermediaries, including funds. And here you would look at a fund portfolio and see to what extent or to which percentage the different portfolio companies is complying with one of the direct criteria. And then in order for the fund itself to be qualified as a gender-focused fund or as a gender lens investing fund, it would have to have at least 30% of its portfolio companies being meeting one of the entrepreneurship, leadership, employment, or consumption criteria. So that is more or less how these kind of criteria work, and it's really kind of standard practice now in the gender lens investing space to use this for private sector operations outside of the EU. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to show this just to make the link that how we then explore gender commitments with our fund clients and other impact investors, starting from the 2X criteria, but then also making sure that we link this into our project cycle. So first of all, at the proposal stage, we would have conversations with our clients to identify what are the potential opportunities here for the fund to support gender equality and women's economic empowerment. How is it linked to other type of goals, whether if it's sustainable land use, broader environmental outcomes, or climate, and see how these can better connect. And then if we identify such opportunities, we would then seek to, at the appraisal stage, agree on the relevant type of gender commitments that we could explore and that are relevant for the fund itself. So here we would agree on, for example, a portfolio target for a fund manager. Then at the approval stage, we will then integrate these type of gender commitments agreed upon into our project documentation and reporting requirement, which then forms the legal documentation to be signed before we disperse our investments. And then once the investment is underway, the fund or the client would then report back to us on the gender targets that have already been agreed on and how it's performing in that regard. So it's really a way for us and for other investors to make sure that it's not only lip service to gender equality investment, but that it's really a part and parcel of the fund investment strategy and the core business of the working areas. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so sometimes what we often hear is that it's quite difficult to do gender, it's difficult to do sustainable land use. Combining the two, then it becomes even more tricky and challenging. But indeed, there are already many actors and players that are doing this very successfully and that are seeing really the benefits of it. So just wanted to share with you some positive examples here on the slide. Many of you might be familiar with Eco Enterprise Partners. They have an equity fund primarily run in Latin America. They are looking at different type of reforestation and afforestation businesses, ecotourism investments and sustainable agriculture, and really seeing how to promote sustainable land use, natural resource conservation, and ecosystem preservation through their investments. And first of all, it's a woman-owned and led fund. They have at least 15% of its capital to fund SMEs that are women-owned or women-led. And beyond that, then they engage with all their portfolio companies to see how they can strengthen the quality opportunities for women's employment. And beyond the gender aspects, they have a really strong focus on supporting indigenous communities and really strengthen the role that they play in sustainable land use management and ecosystem preservation. So that's a really solid example and a really inspiring fund to look at for those that are seeking some inspiration. The second example on the slide is Insure Resilience Investment Fund. This is a debt sub-fund, maybe not directly linked to land use strictly, but basically what they do is to combine loans to microfinance institutions to provide climate insurances against extreme weather events and natural disasters for really the most vulnerable groups of societies, so as to support the beneficiaries to cope with the economic impacts of climate change, including, of course, then land degradation. And they have designed their climate risk insurance scheme to really take into account the differentiated vulnerability to climate risks of women and men, and have a 40% target that their portfolio will be in compliance with the 2X challenge criteria. So that's another example that I find quite interesting, and also climate risk insurance being, you know, quite rare in the market, and just for accessing that for the most vulnerable groups of society. Yeah, I think we are running out of time, so I'll just skip the next two examples, but also to say our Borough Fund and Okavango Capital are two other funds that are doing some interesting work in this space. And to point you to some additional resources, we have developed as part of the 2X collaborative, EIB together with EBRD and CDC, Gender Smart Green Toolkit that's also publicly available. And there you will find a dedicated sector note on gender smart investing in biodiversity. So just wanted to point you towards that in case you are looking for some more additional reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moa, for highlighting the importance of women integration to strengthening also the investment performance, and bringing the example of the European Investment Bank, which is a key player in the market. And all the examples you present are really interesting and will be helpful for many in the call for sure. We'll move on now and hear from Karen Westralen, who is the Impact in ESG lead at the Demeter Initiative. Karen will be bringing the practicalities of integrating gender inclusion in land use finance, bringing her experience in the initiative and also from before. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for this introduction, and thank you to UNEP-WCMC for hosting this webinar and inviting me. Thank you, Catherine and Moa, the previous speakers. My name is Karen. I'm working with the Demeter Initiative. We are setting up a catalyst fund called Colibri with the objective to increase and accelerate the flow of capital to nature-based solutions to climate change. Next slide, please. So what we're planning to do, and you know, we started about a year ago, so we're still in the early stages, but what we're planning to do is to, with our fund, to reduce the real and perceived risk by investors to expand investments in nature-based climate solutions. We want to do this by deploying seed, patient, and junior capital efficiently, demonstrating to investors how nature-based solutions can drive financial returns and have a positive impact on climate change, biodiversity, and local communities. And we want to amplify investor competencies to maximize the impacts of nature-based solutions. As you can see in the graph here, we're planning to start with a 100 million fund, hoping to catalyze 500 million with that. And as we grow, these amounts grow bigger. Next slide, please. Now here you see examples of the types of activities that we are planning to invest in. Nature-based food production or regenerative agriculture, which can be agroforestry systems, silvopastoral systems, permaculture, precision farming, bio-based fertilizers and pesticides, and many other things. It can be sustainable forestry, so investments in sustainable forest management, reforestation, forest restoration, for the production of timber, fiber, fuels, and other forest products. And we're also looking to invest in forest conservation and restoration. Next slide, please. We're not going to set up as a regular fund. With this picture, I try to show to you, how we're planning to work. So on the left, there is Colibri, the 100 million. We're planning to invest in intermediary vehicles or enterprises that then invest in land use projects, let's say nature-based solutions projects. And why have we chosen this route? That is because from our experience, we know many funds, intermediary vehicles, platform companies that really struggle to mobilize the capital needed to make the investments that they want. So what we'd like to do is make available low risk capital to them so that they can build up their experience, their track record, and actually demonstrate to development finance institutions and more private sector investors that, that the risk is manageable and that the impacts are high. Next slide, please. We have a significant impact ambition, and here you see the key SDGs that we are aiming to contribute to, and one of them is gender equality, as you may suspect as a participant in this webinar. Others are climate mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity and ecosystem conservation and restoration, and no poverty or reducing inequalities, creating economic benefits for local communities. Next slide, please. So we think we have opportunities to promote gender equality at 3 levels. That's at the level of our own fund, Colibri. We can look at our own organization. We actually have the majority of the founders of Colibri are women. The majority of the leadership roles currently are occupied by women, and the majority of our workforce, it's small, but they're not all, but the large majority are women. And then we have, of course, an opportunity at portfolio level, which gets us to our intermediary vehicles, our direct investees. Also there, we think we have opportunities to promote gender equality at the level of the fund manager or the enterprise that we invest in, and at the level of their portfolio. And their portfolio brings us to the projects that Colibri eventually looks at supporting. Next slide, please. I have to thank MOA for already explaining what the 2X challenge is. The 2X challenge is actually the tool or the criteria that we are looking at to build and explain our gender commitment. We started digging into this a couple of months ago, so please bear with me. I'm sharing with you a work in progress. Why the 2X challenge? Because we've been searching the web, and we've been talking to people, and we think for an outfit like Colibri, this is this is the most suitable framework we've been able to find, and we think it actually gives us a lot of opportunity to systemize what we're capable of doing, and to actually grab all the opportunities that we have in our entire portfolio. The next slide, please, which is a slide that you've already seen. Apologies for the duplication. MOA has already kindly explained these are the criteria of the 2X challenge, and they show very nicely 4 direct criteria at fund managers level and or company level, and they also show the 1 criteria applicable to financial intermediaries. And we're actually looking at all of them. Next slides, please. Yeah, and this is what we're at Colibri. I see that the colors have slightly changed, but what you see that according to our current assessment, Colibri scores favorably on 3 out of the direct criteria. And a question that we need to ask ourselves with respect to our investments is whether we can actually allocate at least 30% of our capital to 2X eligible intermediary vehicles. And, you know, our understanding of that requirement is that 30% of our capital needs to be allocated, one, to fund managers that qualify directly, that is through the direct criteria. They have to meet at least one of those. And the other element of it is you know, can the intermediary vehicles actually allocate at least 30% of their capital to projects that meet at least one of the direct criteria? We're very close to a positive answer, but I didn't want to include that in this slide yet. I think we can. And I think we can actually, you know, commit to the 2X challenge ourselves. Now, at the level of our projects, we have limited detailed knowledge. We have a significant pipeline, but we're also raising our funds. So, you know, it's a dance that we're dancing with our pipeline parties, and we have some information, but not enough to answer, you know, all the questions exactly that are out here. I'd like to get back to a point that Gaurav made at the beginning, the point of cost, because we like to be very bold in our ambition, and we want to say, yes, we're going to do this, and yes. But yeah, one thing that we're looking very carefully at is indeed the cost at our own level. What implications does this have for our own team, for our own capacity that we need to put in place? What are the capacity and resource requirements at the level of the intermediary funds that we are looking to support? And you know, can that all be absorbed by the management fees that are being paid? And or do we need to look for technical assistance facilities and other means to make sure that once we commit to the 2X challenge in our case, that we do it well and meaningfully. And I'd like to leave it there. And I also understand my time is up. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Karen. We wish Colibri all the success. And yeah, it's great to see how the practical implementation of the 2X challenge, how it looks in practice. And we now have time for questions. I will open now. So we have a couple in the chat already for Karen, but also we will open to comments as well afterwards when the questions are done. So just looking at the chat now, but please raise your hand if you would like to make the question in person. So from Marie-André, what type of intermediary vehicles are you looking at, Karen? And what is the criteria? Yeah,
we're looking at funds and developers of natural capital solutions projects. So any funds that is investing or seeking to invest in natural capital solutions can knock on our door. You know, referring to the type of investment we can make, we want to be very additional. So we're not going to compete with DFI money or private sector money. We'd like to catalyze with our investments from DFIs and commercial parties. And if I may, I see some follow-on questions. The geographical area, it is global with an initial focus on the global south, so across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And what kind of ticket sizes is Colibri looking at? It's actually a conversation that we're having as we speak. Initially, we've been thinking about a portfolio of 10 to 15 funds. In our pipeline, we've got some very small ones, and very small for us is like 5 million. And we've got some pretty significant ones going up to, let's say, 30. So if I can, that's the range right now, 5 to 30 million. That's the 3 questions I've seen from me in the chat. If you see
Yeah.
more, please let me know.
No, that's all the questions we had. I have one that sent directly to me. I will ask this one and then open the floor for anyone who would like to comment or to make a question. So what would be your advice to a fund looking to improve their gender lens investing? And this is probably for all the 3 of us, or all the 3 of you. We're starting with Moa, perhaps.
Yeah, I think first of all, getting to know your portfolio from a gender angle. So what we see, I mean, both actually with ourselves and with funds themselves, is that maybe they haven't really looked at their portfolio from a gender perspective, and there might be a lot of opportunities already in an existing portfolio. So just kind of trying to screen the companies that you have either in your current portfolio or in the pipeline from, you know, these kind of gender screening criterias. The 2X challenge one, I think, I mean, also as Karin was saying, it provides a quite practical framework to just starting to unpack and look at it. So look at your portfolio companies, like, are there any there that are led by women? You know, are there any ones that are looking at the employment for women, or even is the services and products really actually tackling a gender gap? So this we also see quite often, especially, for example, in the energy space, you have off-grid energy solutions really tackling energy poverty, and if targeted to the women's market, that's like a great product that would kind of fall in that space. So I would say looking at the portfolio and pipeline from that perspective is a good way to start, and then from having an understanding of your portfolio, then starting to develop your own strategy. Maybe you'll see that, okay, we actually have an opportunity on women's employment, or we have an opportunity to support women entrepreneurs, or the products we're financing may close a gender gap, and then you could further, you know, hone in and specialize maybe within one of those areas, or you might see that you want to tackle all of them. So I would say understanding your portfolio, and then seeing also how you can start collecting that data and information from your investees, and see what capacity is there.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit to that, is interesting because, like, Colibri initially was focusing very much on climate impacts and on biodiversity and ecosystem impacts. And of course, we knew that gender was going to come to us, but the initial reaction was, ooh, can we live up to this? Can we live? So it actually demonstrates what Moa said, right? We all have a first insight into our own portfolio, into our pipeline. But, you know, when we started digging deeper, and when we started including gender-related questions to funds in our pipelines, the answers were actually, they were very encouraging, and have led us to almost conclude now that actually we can commit to this challenge even. Because initially we were thinking, okay, these are useful indicators to track. But when digging deeper, we're finding that actually we think we can meet this.
I think that's a really good point, Karin. I mean,
Yeah.
we have also found that just by asking the question, you know, starting equipping our investment officers with, you know, just 3 very simple questions, and then starting the conversation, and we get more out of that than we thought. And I think also important to underline is, at least how we see it, and how the 2X challenge is set up, is that an investee doesn't have to meet all the targets at the point of investment. There's also that opportunity to follow either, you know, if you're a fund, your investee, or we as a DFI, to follow a fund and support in that journey. So put in place the mechanisms that are needed over time to actually meet these criteria. So, you know, you can look at it both at the level of what is there at the moment, but also the progression and the opportunities.
And perhaps directing the question to Catherine in terms of how do we link this to the global policy agenda, and how investors could be looking at this as an opportunity to align with the global policy agenda too?
I think it aligns well with global commitments. So it does relate well with actions that will be set up in the gender plan of action. And I can see that from the 2X challenge, there are key elements related to women's empowerment and leadership and the level of investment that it aligns to the key priorities. But I do think that there should be an opportunity to, in terms of monitoring, not only the investment for the 2X challenge, but also making the linkages with the contributions that they will be making to global. It's not only the SDGs. I think they're going to be contributing to the post-2020 framework from the Convention on Biological Diversity, and also towards implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action has a specific critical area of concern that is women and environment. So it will be directly making contributions to that as well.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Juliana, which might be an interesting discussion as well. In any of the case studies that you know, have you deal with tensions in customary law and access of human to land use and other natural resources? So tensions in customary laws. And perhaps Juliana, if you are there and would like to pose the question yourself, so that.
Yes, thank you. And sorry for not being clear enough in the chat, but it's just about, we sometimes work very closely with communities in which, for example, by law, women don't have access to land or don't usually carry out some types of roles within land conservation and land use. And those things usually create some tensions that we have to some extent managed to solve. But I just wanted to understand or learn a little bit more if any of the presenters have experience on this and how to deal with those tensions that usually emerge.
Your thoughts?
So maybe one way, I mean, maybe not directly, I mean, it's a super relevant question, right? And one that's definitely there at play. One way that we have worked with financial intermediaries, not so much funds, but primarily banks, is to then remove, for example, land ownership or property ownership as a criteria for collateral. So in providing, loans to women farmers or women agribusinesses to look at different ways of supporting that loan than looking at land or property as the main form of collateral. So that's one kind of very practical way that at least local banks or maybe not so much MFIs, but at least local banks could help to tackle some of those more structural and policy driven barriers.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, because this is really for indeed a bank to adjust its processes and its requirements and look for alternatives. I mean, in other contexts of project finance, for example, where I have or my colleagues have tried, to help women compete for project benefits of whatever kinds. This is, of course, very, I mean, the question raised is very familiar to me because, wherever you are trying to, change relationships of power, et cetera, there's going to be a reaction from men, the leadership, or whoever. And I think this is, and I mean, because I screened the 2X challenge criteria for interventions of this kind, actually, and I was very happy to find that it is under the employment requirements where I think they say that, it is a percentage of women in employment or involved in another, economic way as suppliers or whatever in a project, plus one other qualitative criteria. And if you look at examples of these qualitative criteria, I got really excited because there you have room to start addressing gender-based violence, if that is a problem. There you have room to start addressing land ownership issues, if people agree that that's the key problem. There you have room to start addressing so many things, It's not easy. I'm not saying that, but it is, I think it goes back to stakeholder engagement in a very big way, right? You need to start a dialogue, and not just with the women, but also with the men, with the leadership, with the youth, with the, and through that, you can get some change going. And I was really happy to find that room in the 2X challenge, because I think this is, Juliana, a really important question, and we don't want to, go around it, right? Because it's one of the main reasons why there is gender inequality.
And lastly, to add to that, as I mentioned, there are best practices. This publication from the CBD, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the challenges are highlighted precisely because the different roles and the issue related to land. But as Karen was mentioning, stakeholder engagement, and also ensuring that there's some gender expertise or local expertise in terms of the gender relations and ways to manage and to note that the benefits will be for the whole community. It's not that women and men who's going to have more power, it's just benefiting the whole community. And the purpose of the fund is to generate livelihoods and also environmental outcomes. And some of the findings from this publication precisely show the importance of financing, because it leads to questioning that power relation, changing roles, and it has also had an impact on, indirectly, on the inclusion of women in the decision-making table, precisely because they are involved, their participation increases. So it is challenging, but it's worth doing.
And I think also, here the role of partnerships, right? So finance is one part of the puzzle, and financiers come in with the financing piece, but of course addressing some of the challenges around, customary laws or the power relationships. It's really where financiers need to partner up with, local civil society organizations, women's groups on the ground, and also link up with, with the broader broader political actors as well. So, there's different parts of the puzzle, and different actors can come in with different parts of the solutions and work together.
Yeah, and then from a fund perspective, it's really critical to think this through in advance, because what I don't want, at some point, we have our fund mobilized and we find all these opportunities out there, but we don't have the resources to actually follow up on them, either because, the regular management fees are not sufficient to cover, these out of the box interventions, or because of whatever way. So you need to think about this in advance. You need to think about what resources you're going to need and what partnerships you're going to need to truly deliver.
Yeah, what a great conversation. I guess this will be useful for many people on the call. And I would like to, so we are reaching the hour here. So I'd like to thank again Karen, Moa, and Catherine. Thank you very much, all the people that attended as well. Just to let you know that this webinar it was recorded and will be available on the Land Use Finance Impact Hub. You can Google for it, or if my colleagues could kindly just drop the link on the chat, which is this kind of the hub of all the information that we've been generating in this context of environmental and social impacts and risks in land use finance together with UNEP. Thank you very much. So watch this space. We'll have other webinars coming soon. If you have any suggestions of topics as well that you would like for us to explore, please send those to my colleagues, to myself or my colleagues. This topic, for instance, the gender one, was suggested by one of the funds that we've been engaging in this process. And it was, as we saw, it was really helpful and really useful. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Karen, Moa, and Catherine again. And see you next time.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.